What is going on, Bengals fans? Welcome to episode 2 of the Orange and Black Insider. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and obviously this podcast is presented by Cincy Jungle. So um, thanks for tuning in, thanks for downloading, and hopefully you enjoyed our inaugural episode last week. We're going to continue doing these weekly, and we're very excited about it. Obviously, there's a lot going on with training camp and news and all of that good stuff, but we're very excited to keep kicking off this podcast and getting it rolling. And I'm, of course, joined by the same two gentlemen that joined me last week, Scott Schultz and Connor Howe. Scott, how have you been?
Great.
Doing well?
Yep. Everything's going well.
Good.
Just looking forward to the season starting.
Yeah, I think everybody's in the same boat there. Connor, how you been? I know you've been a busy guy.
Yeah, it's been good. Working a lot, but it's fun.
Yeah, well, don't work too hard, man. You gotta. It's still the summer. You gotta kind of take it a little easy on yourself.
No days off. No days off. 6 or 7 days a week.
That's right. Well, as I said, we're going to start the show off. There's a ton of news going on with the club. Some of it good. This week has been a little scary, especially on the injury front. The Bengals had a couple of scares in early practices, early training camp practices, and then as this week kicked off, there's a lot of different injuries. So I'll start with probably the biggest news. And that is William Jackson III, the Bengals' first-round pick this year, tore a pectoral muscle, and he's having surgery to have that repaired. Marvin Lewis said this week that he thinks there's still an opportunity for Jackson to come back and play this season and not necessarily go on IR, season-ending IR. So I think there's an injured reserve designated for return opportunity for him. I'll start with you, Connor. What's the impact of the injury, and how do you think the Bengals are going to be able to recover?
I think a lot of fans were pretty quick to understand, which kind of surprised me that Jackson just wasn't really slated to see a lot of playing time. Like it or not, Kirkpatrick is kind of the starter on the left side, and Adam Jones is the starter on the right side. And hopefully Denard, obviously, we'll talk about his injury too, but he's slated to play in the slot. So at best, Jackson's the number 4. But even with guys like Josh Shaw, even potentially like Chris Lewis Harris, those guys could even potentially have been higher than him on the depth chart. There's really no way of knowing. So obviously it's a big loss. Cincinnati never really seems to get lucky with their rookies and seems to get anything out of the rookies except for 2011 when Dalton and Green kind of played pretty well. But ultimately, I mean, look at last year. We had Oguehi was on the PUP list and didn't play till late in the season. He played he was decent, but we didn't really even seem to get that much out of him. We got a little bit out of Fisher and Croft. It sucks that Jackson got hurt. There's no denying that. But, at least it's a pec injury and not something, related to his, shoulder or foot or leg. I would be a lot more concerned with that. Not that, a pec injury is okay, but, yeah, basically it sucks he got hurt. I don't think it's going to really kill the team. He wasn't really going to get that much time anyways, and I think that's how most of the fan base feels, which I'm pretty encouraged by at this point.
Yeah. Scott, part of the news that goes along with Jackson's injury is Leon Hall signing now with the Giants this week, and I think a lot of people thought with the severity of Jackson's injury and the Bengals potentially needing a corner to fill that spot as he's out. Leon Hall's gone. There's also now another injury. Darqueze Dennard, I think, has a sprained ankle, so that's kind of an issue there. Do you think the Bengals need to kind of go into the free agent market and maybe add a veteran that might be floating out there? Do you think they're set even with Dennard and Jackson currently out of the lineup, or what do you think?
Obviously it doesn't hurt to look. I was actually kind of surprised that Leon Hall didn't come back just because he'd been here so long. He knew the system, he knew the players, and it was interesting they didn't announce the sign until after William Jackson got hurt. So you figure he may kind of be sitting around kind of waiting, looking, saying we have Kirkpatrick, you have Dennard, Shaw, Jackson, Jones. Do I have a chance to even, crack the top 5? I may even get cut. But then, Jackson gets hurt, and like you said, Nard gets hurt, and then he signs to the Giants. So I think that was one thing that might sting for some people was the fact that he waited. And it may have been money. I mean, he had known all along he was going there, but just the timing of it seemed kind of on the disappointing, I think, from a fan's perspective, kind of hoping that, oh, okay, we still have him in our back pocket. We still can bring him in, and that didn't work out. But I think it obviously doesn't hurt to look at A1, and obviously I'm sure as camp goes on and teams start cutting people, especially on cut down day, they're probably going to look at some cornerbacks, especially if Denard's injury lingers. I know he got hurt and missed a big chunk last year, and I think a lot of it depends on him because, like you said, Jones and Kirkpatrick are clearly the two starters, and that doesn't change. Shaw can be the third or fourth, depending on if Denard comes back, but then you get very thin if Denard's out because then you're losing Denard and Jackson. But they seem to be high on Chris Lewis Harris, so I'd say it probably won't just because I think they probably feel they have enough young depth, enough athletic guys back there that they don't feel there's a need at this point.
Yeah, I think more than it being a big effect on the overall roster, because as Connor mentioned, I don't think Jackson was especially initially going to have a huge role on the defense. He was probably going to play some special teams and things of that nature. So I don't know if it's a big loss from an actual on-field 2016 on-field standpoint. I think it's more of like a psychological thing. I think the team's excited. They've got a deep roster, and you hear that the top pick is going to be out for an extended period of time. So I think it's more of a psychological thing for the team, where it's a little bit of a downer. And Connor, you mentioned Abwehi. That's just a different circumstance. I think the team and everybody knew that was going to be kind of a redshirt year for him. And even though Jackson wasn't going to have a huge role this year, maybe on defense, I think it's just a different scenario. I mean, I don't think people planned on him redshirting. And then obviously there's the developmental aspect where Jackson, could really use this time. And even though he'd take a back seat to some of these guys, I think, obviously it just hurts his development and puts him a little bit behind the eight ball. So I hope for a speedy recovery. It'd be great if he can come back this year. It's not a devastating thing to this team, but you still would have liked to have him around and keep growing through the year as things go. I will say now that obviously this puts a lot more pressure on Drake Kirkpatrick with Denard and Jackson out of the lineup, so he's got to really step up his game this year. Even though he's not a slot guy like Denard, he's going to need to play pretty well, and as will Adam Jones, who has been playing well. So that's kind of the update on William Jackson. Some good news. The Bengals did extend Ryan Hewitt to a contract, and he's set to stay with the team for another 3 years, I believe. So that's big news there. I'll start with you, Scott. Do you think the contract's deserved? I mean, he's a good football player. The stats obviously aren't there because he plays a role that doesn't rack up a lot of stats. But do you think that it was warranted, especially with some of the run game struggles we saw last year and him not really being in the lineup all that much because of formation issues, and then he got injured at the end of the year? What do you think about the contract, and do you believe it's warranted?
I think most fans would probably agree as far as signing him. I think just the idea of signing him was good. I know a lot of people like him. They love the idea he's a hard worker. He came from the undrafted ranks. He seems to always be trying. He's putting a hit on guys. He can also catch. But then when you see the money he got, and that was very surprising to me. I think it was $2.5 million per year. And looking at I think it was $7.5 million over 3 years, so 2.5 per. And I was doing a little looking today on fullback, and I know he's not purely a fullback, but on fullback salaries, the average salary is about $850,000, and because it's generally guys who are undrafted free agents, or if they get re-signed, it's $1 million or less, or somewhere around there. And I think after this year, he will be the highest paid fullback in the NFL, and that raises the question: is he really worth that money of being the highest, paid fullback in the NFL? Is he an All-Pro? Is he a Pro Bowler? And looking at that, he probably isn't. I'd love to see him get to that point. I hope they see something in him that he's going to emerge this year. Maybe it's more of a reaction to Eifert and Croft being hurt, and they really want to have a third option who they think can play some tight end for them. So the money kind of surprised me, but I can't argue with the player, with them feeling this is one of their guys, that he does everything that Lewis loves for the team on the field and off the field.
That's a good point. Connor, do you think that the extent? I mean, I know the Bengals they made it known that he was one of those guys they wanted to extend this year, but this offseason. But do you think part of the reason it getting done right now is because of the injuries at the tight end spot?
I don't necessarily think that. And just to add on to what Scott was saying, I think that one thing that kind of, if anything, is an indicator is that like maybe this re-signing just shows that the Bengals are going to get back to running the ball, and whether for better or worse. In 2014, they were really committed to the run, and last year it obviously struggled, but maybe they're going to employ some more I formation. I mean, obviously we all know Hewitt hasn't been like a top 5 fullback in his time in Cincinnati, but he's definitely shown glimpses of potential, and he's definitely been a difference maker at times throughout his career. And so maybe this is just Zampese and whoever else that is just calling the plays on offense, just saying, you know what, Hewitt's a really valuable asset. We want to have him in the building moving forward. Maybe he's just been really impressive this offseason. And obviously the Bengals like to reward the guys who've been on their team. And by paying a guy who, what's his salary, like $2 million-ish or something like that. So I think that they can afford to pay him the money they're paying him right now. They have, as we all know, like Cincinnati loves to just leave all of the money that they can and leave it for the next season as the rollover or whatever. So it's like Scott said. I mean, the Bengals, like, it's a good investment for them because they can afford it, and obviously Hewitt's a really good player, and he probably doesn't deserve top fullback money, but I just think maybe this is an indicator of something bigger that's potentially going to happen with the scheme, and for that reason I really like it. As to your original question with just Hewitt, I don't know. I don't think that I don't know. I personally I just really like the scheme fit. That's pretty much all it is for me. Is that maybe we're going to get back to seeing I formation. Jeremy Hill really excelled out of it in 2014, even though opponents knew it was coming. Cincinnati still lined up that I formation and really just put their foot in the turf and busted through the line of scrimmage for some big gains, which I really like to see.
Yeah, so the contract, it's not, the team hasn't announced it, so the official figures haven't totally been released, but there's some insider information. He will make $2 million this year, and he'll make between $2 and $3 million annually over the length of the deal. So, and it was a 3-year extension, as I mentioned earlier. So, kind of big news there. So that's now in the fold. They're probably going to look at some other guys that they're going to extend, and that's going to be obviously a priority this offseason. There's a couple of other guys, Kevin Zeitler and maybe even Dre Kirkpatrick, that they look to extend. The Bengals like to do that during training camp before the season starts. Get a lot of those guys deals who are set to expire and get them done before they become free agents. That kind of segues also into Tyler Croft. He hyperextended his knee, so that's been an injury, and CJ Uzomah is now kind of the primary tight end. I'm sure Hewitt's kind of filling in there, as well as some of the guys on the back end of the positional roster there at tight end. So a lot of players. Sean Williams was walked off the field. Defensive end rookie undrafted free agent Jack Anguish had an injury as well. So a lot of guys that kind of got hobbled, and luckily they had a day off right after a lot of those injuries occurred. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on. One last little tidbit, and I want to ask your guys' opinion on, give me a guy that impressed you based on videos you've seen and information you've heard. Give me a guy that impressed you the most throughout this week and the early part of training camp, and I'll start with you, Scott.
I think one that is someone who I really haven't been high on just because I'm more high on his backups has been Brandon LaFell. I haven't seen too many videos of him, but from what I've heard from some of the local media here in the Ohio area, is he's basically has not dropped the ball. And when he got signed, one of the biggest complaints the Bengals fans had and the Patriots fans had, who were more than happy to come on Cincy Jungle and give us crap for signing him, was drop balls. That he had a horrible drop rate, doesn't hold on to anything. He was bad at it last year. Everything out of camp this year has been he's catching the ball. And if he catches the ball, that is a big boost for this offense, especially after you've lost Jones and Sanu. And the idea being that he's going to, I assume, be outside taking a Marvin Jones spot. Having him catch the ball and not drop the ball is obviously a very, very beneficial for the team when you look at there's not a lot of depth behind him. That if he struggles, you're looking at a lot of guys like Kumaro and Alford and Wright, people who just don't have that experience, or Tate, who obviously very few Bengals fans are actually rooting for. So the fact that LaFell is catching the ball, I think, is a very positive thing out of camp so far.
And for me, I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I haven't really been that plugged in. I've been busy with work. For those who don't know, I work for the Chargers. So if you're interested on Chargers training camp stand-ups.
Conflict of interest here, Connor.
I'd love to say former AFC North wide receiver Travis Benjamin's been awesome. But for the Bengals, just based on what I've been reading about, obviously at CincyJungle.com and in the media, I think it's, I don't know, I think that Cody Core seems to be stepping up, which is pretty cool. And just away from the wide receiver position, I think Nick Vigil also had a couple of interesting plays where I think he had a pretty good interception. I heard, man, I really need to get caught up on all this stuff. But I think that Vigil, from what I've been hearing, is playing pretty well, which is encouraging for a team that's pretty desperate for athletic linebackers at this point. To see a guy who could potentially be the nickel linebacker of the future is pretty awesome. And just before we get on any other topic, you mentioned the Zeitler and Kirkpatrick extensions. I know this kind of maybe potentially rile you guys up, but right now is the perfect time to re-sign Drake Kirkpatrick. I saw an interesting comment in one of the comment sections on one of our articles, which is basically that the Bengals should never sign Kirkpatrick because if they sign him now, he's not going to be worth the money. He's going to be signed to a contract that's too valuable for what we should be paying him. And if he has a good year, then he's going to get paid big money somewhere else in free agency. Well, that's the point. You got to bet on your guy, hope he has a good year, and get return on investment. And I mean, we saw it with the Dalton contract. I don't think a lot of people like the Andy Dalton contract. Everyone's like, oh, $100 million for a quarterback. And obviously the nuances of the contract, he was still, even if he didn't play as well as he's been playing, he still would have been he'd be worth the contract that he signed. But I mean, Kirkpatrick's playing on the left side. He faces a lot more difficult competition than Adam Jones. I think a lot of people forget about that. Kirkpatrick's going up generally against the number ones, while Jones is going up against the guys who aren't necessarily the primary pass catchers on their team. And Kirkpatrick has shown in a limited amount of time that he does have the capability of potentially being that cornerback one. He shut down DeAndre Hopkins in the Texans game, and he also was all over the field in the Rams game last year. I think he had like 10-plus tackles with a couple of pass breakups, maybe 3. And obviously for Zeitler too, extend him now because he's going to be worth even more in free agency. But signing those guys, they haven't been amazing. I mean, Kirkpatrick hasn't been nearly as good as Zeitler, but both of those guys have the potential. Cincinnati loves to re-sign their players. Sign them both now while their price tag is still low and reasonable before they hit free agency, and they're both way out of the Bengals price range. That's just my take.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting thought, and I do agree with you that the Bengals could potentially get a more team-friendly deal with Drake Kirkpatrick right now than they would obviously when the free agency frenzy hits in March, and I agree with you there. But at the same time, you almost wonder now, does Dre have a little bit more of a bargaining chip now that so many injuries have hit the cornerback position, whether it's Denard, whether it's Jackson, and that's just, I don't know, food for thought there. But the Bengals usually extend at least a couple of guys. They've kind of done that over the past 4 or 5 years in the offseason, and it's worked out well for them. They keep making the playoffs, and these guys continue to play pretty well for them. So that's something to keep an eye on. So that's kind of the camp recap, a little bit of news and notes from this week and some analysis on that. One of the segments we want to do on this show revolves around fantasy football. And I was joking before the show with Scott that I'm not really the greatest. I love playing fantasy football, but for some reason I tend to know a lot about the game and I know a lot about what's going on around the league, but I never seem to play fantasy football very well. I never seem to fare well. And of course, Scott invited me to his league right after I told him that. So, but Scott, you're kind of a resident fantasy football guy for Cincy Jungle. You mentioned in the first show that you really became passionate about football because of fantasy football, and that kind of got you back into the game and being a Bengals fan. So we're going to do a segment, and we're going to kick it off this week, and it's going to be about fantasy football, and probably for the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it's going to be more about some draft tips and guys to look at. And then as we go into the season, it will probably be more about, duds, studs, all that kind of good stuff. So, Scott, this is your baby. For this segment, why don't you tell us what you're thinking about for fantasy football as people get geared up for their drafts?
Okay, thanks. And yeah, that offer for our league stands. If you want to join.
Great,
so,
thank
yeah,
you.
Basically on.
I want that invite too.
Only if your track record is as good as Anthony's.
Oh yeah. Well, no, mine's a little better probably, but I mean it's terrible. Terrible. Invite me.
So on fantasy football, we have probably a few weeks until most people are drafting. So I thought each week we'd probably look at a different segment, just hit a few key points. This week I was going to look at running backs. And one of the big things you may have noticed if you played fantasy football last year is just the total lack of high-scoring running backs. The bell cows, if you've been in fantasy for 5-10 years, you had many years where you had the Priest Holmes, LaDainian Tomlinson, Sean Alexander, these guys you could count on that were always drafted in top half. They were getting you 250, 300, 350 points, just dominating your league, and everyone was taking running backs, and the guy who didn't take a running back in the first round kind of got laughed at, and that was kind of the big thing was, you're taking running backs. Fast forward to 2015, for the first time ever, by my counting, there were no running backs who even topped the 250-point mark, and for like a non-point per reception on PPR. Very low across the board. The number of running backs who topped 200 points, anywhere near there was just hugely dropped, and there's several reasons for that. One, there were injuries. Guys like Jamal Charles got hurt. Guys like Le'Veon Bell got hurt. In addition to that, you also have a lot of teams going more of the tandem. The Bengals being a perfect example of that. They, with Hill and Bernard, they like to use two backs, and even if one's hot or cold, they tend to feed both. And there's a lot of teams going that direction, trying to keep the players healthy. So because of that, you now have this very unique situation in 2016. Where you see a lot of wide receivers going early. And so you see a lot of, because there's just not that number of running backs out there that are the the guys you can count on. Right. There's no Marshall Faulk, no Green James, or you just don't have that guy. So because there seem to be a few people who are getting reached a bit too high, so I just wanted to highlight them and why they might be going a bit too high in some of the leagues. First one to mention was Lamar Miller. He never really had a great season. He's going to Houston, which had a horrible run game last year. Arian Foster, he was hurt, but just had struggled. His backups didn't do much. He's gone there. They have a horrible quarterback. I know last week we talked about someone thinking that Dalton was no better than Osweiler. I will disagree with that. I just don't see Houston's offense churning out a running back worthy of a top 10, top 12 pick where Lamar Miller seems to be going. He's being drafted up there because he's supposed to be a three-down back, be a bell cow, but you can still have a lot of carries and not get the yardage. So he's one I think is being reached for. Another one is Devonta Freeman, the running back from Atlanta. If you remember this time last year, Tevin Coleman was the starter, and it was only when he got hurt that Freeman went in. And early in the year, Freeman had a few really big games. I think his first 5 or 6 weeks, he was phenomenal. If you had him after that, he was a total dud. And going into camp this year, Coleman's healthy, and the Falcons coaches even said they expect to do a split of some sort. It could be 50-50. It could be hot hand, cold hand. So I think a lot of people are reaching for him in round 1, early round 2, expecting him to have last year. And I'm not sure how that's going to happen when the team even says he's only going to get about half the touches. And assuming he's a starter, he's no guarantee to stay the starter. And the other one is David Johnson. I've seen him go as high as 1, 2, 3 in a lot of drafts. one of the things I see with him is here's a guy who only had like 500 rush yards last year. And I know he had a ton of receiving yards. So a lot of that seemed to be on really big plays where he just kind of got loose. And if you look at the Cardinals last year, they just had one of those years for the ages. That's one of those years their fans will talk about for 10, 20 years. Palmer had a career year. They just, one of those years you're not going to have every year. They just had a lot of huge plays, just had a phenomenal season. And I think a lot of people look at what Johnson did and say, wow, he scored a lot of points, had a lot of touchdowns. Now you make him the starter for the whole year. But the problem is they have Andre Ellington coming back, and granted, he's not going to be much more than a third down back, but they brought Chris Johnson back. And word out of Arizona is that David Johnson isn't going to be the bell cow everyone expects him to be. He'll probably get workload a little more than last year, so he's probably going to be worth, he'll probably get a top 10, top 15 running back when it's all said and done, but I just don't see him being, the guy, the number one or number two. And I could be totally wrong on that. I just don't get that feel from their camp that he's going to, produce, 1,000 receiving yards and 15, 16 total touchdowns unless he just has a second career year. And then one running back I'm just going to end up on is one everyone's missing out on is Arian Foster. A lot of people have kind of written him off because he's always hurt. Had a horrible year last year and a horrible offense. He went to Miami, and I've seen a lot of people drafting AJ higher than him, which doesn't make a lot of sense because the coaches are basically saying Foster's our starter. He's our guy. He's our 3-down back. He tends to be going around the 40th or 30th running back overall taken, and you look at what Miami's saying, and they want to throw the ball too. He can catch the ball. He can run the ball. As long as he stays healthy, I think he's going to be one heck of a deal. So anyway, that's it for running backs. That's it for fantasy football. And if you disagree with me violently, feel free. Well, not violently, but if you disagree with me vehemently, feel free to make a post in the comments and tell me why I'm crazy or tell me why you might agree.
All right. Well, it is interesting. It's about how the last 2 or 3 years I've noticed in fantasy football drafts that just with the emphasis of the passing game in the NFL being a quote-unquote passing league now, that premier wide receivers seem to be more of a premium for some people than running backs, and maybe people kind of start scooping up a slew of those mid-tier running backs in those middle rounds. But good stuff, Scott. I appreciate it, and I know our listeners will appreciate it. So keep it tuned here every week for the Fantasy Football Insider from the Orange and Black Insider with Scott Schultz. Scott, good stuff there. Appreciate the knowledge, and I can't wait to see how I can use that against you in the league this year. So I'm gonna give you a taste of your own medicine there. So last week we kind of did a little segment. I brought up Colin Cowherd of Fox Sports, who in a single week not only pegged the Bengals to miss the playoffs at 8-8. But also made Andy Dalton one of the lowest, in the lowest tier of his quarterback rankings, along with Ryan Tannehill, Kirk Cousins, and Brock Osweiler. So we've got a couple more haters this week, and I'm going to give each of you a say on one of these, and I'll start with you, Connor. Frank Schwab of Yahoo Sports, he was to his credit, he was complimentary, and he did note that he thinks the Bengals are a playoff team, but his title of the article on Yahoo Sports, Frank Schwab, 2016 NFL preview, same old song for the Bengals. So basically what he's saying is that the Bengals have a talented roster. They're probably a playoff team again this year, but just because they're the Bengals, he thinks they're going to be one and done based on previous history. So do you think, your overall thoughts on that, Connor, and do you think Frank Schwab is using kind of the just because it's the Bengals type of mentality when talking about the team?
You should have just called it same old headline. I mean, how many times have we seen this headline?
That's right.
Look, there's so many reasons why people just want to, lump the Bengals in as a playoff, one and done team. But when it's all said and done, they have one of the highest chances of winning the Super Bowl out of any team in the NFL, simply because we all know they're going to be there in the playoffs. And sure, we can talk about this literally every single episode. You can chalk up the losses to whatever you want. You can chalk them up to Marvin Lewis, Andy Dalton, the combination of the two, or like me, you could just take a step back and think about the fact that really their biggest issue in the playoffs, and it was last year too, or in January, was the abysmal run defense. I mean, Fitzgerald Toussaint, some guy who I've literally never heard of before, ran all over the Bengals defense. And in 2013, 3 running backs had 50-plus rushing yards against the Chargers. Arian Foster ran for almost 200 yards 2 times against the Bengals in the playoffs. Look, honestly, it's just getting old. And you can say what you want about the team, and obviously maybe I'm going to come off as a homer because we're obviously a Bengals podcast, but at the end of the day, the Bengals are they're going to be a contender this year, and hopefully they just don't get hurt. That's really what it comes down to. The past 3 or 4 years, they've been banged up in all their playoff games. They lost Geno Atkins in 2013, half their team in 2014, and Andy Dalton in 2015. So, if their most significant injury in 2016 is maybe an Andrew Whitworth, who's a guy who's replaceable, and in the sense that Whitworth isn't just a guy that you can just compensate for the loss, but you have the personnel to do so with Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher. So maybe a guy where we have that, just a guy that we can lose to injury, or like a Domata Peko is a better example, where you have maybe a Billings step up and compensate for the production in his absence. You need basically the team. I just think needs to stay healthy. It's the same old headline. It's the laziest journalism. The laziest thing you can possibly see out of a journalist is just throughout the yearly, Bengals are going to be one and done again this year. It takes more guts to say they're not going to make the playoffs, which is just going to make them look, whoever says that, like Heath Evans and whoever else it is, it's just going to make those people look bad in 8 months or however long the season goes.
Yeah, so along with Frank Schwab of Yahoo, we had another guy, and again, some of this stuff is clickbait, but and as you said, there are some biases, Connor, but I think some biases from this next author at NFL.com is also shining through, and that's Dave Dameshek. And while he's a funny guy and he's entertaining on the NFL Network, and some of his writings are entertaining, he is a dyed-in-the-wool Steelers fan. I believe his avatar on Twitter is Jack Lambert with Dave Dameshek's face photoshopped on Jack Lambert's body. So
he also thinks that Mario Lemieux is the best hockey player of all time, for what it's worth.
There you go. So he did an interesting piece. It's ranking the offensive triplets around the league, and Scott noted that the Bengals have the 20th best triplets in the league, with Andy Dalton, Jeremy Hill, and AJ Green. Now, what's interesting about this, he didn't resign himself to just go quarterback, running back, wide receiver for every team. For instance, the Patriots have Gronkowski in there, as well as he also put Garoppolo and Dion Lewis, who, by the way, with Jimmy Garoppolo, who has yet to take a significant snap, is ranked one spot ahead of the Bengals at number 20. So I just kind of want to get your impression, Scott, on this other hater of the week.
I read through that, and this guy is crazy on several levels. Just a few examples I want to highlight of just where I think he's just kind of playing hype and not really giving a serious analysis was, number one, he had Dallas, and I kind of get they have a great offensive line. Romo's back. Des Bryant is really good, and Ezekiel Elliott. But Ezekiel's totally unproven. They have 2 guys coming back from injury. Romo was hurt. They don't know how good he's going to be, how healthy he's going to be. Bryant. So given the name factor, okay, I maybe see that, but you're putting a lot of faith on an unproven running back, and he might be. Todd Gurley, but he could be Trent Richardson, Monty Ball. You don't really know what you're going to have with Ezekiel. And then probably the biggest shock from his number 5, the Buffalo Bills, with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback. And
Yep.
I know he kind of came out of nowhere and had a solid year, but if you look at the games he played last year, they only asked him to throw the ball 30 times in 5 games. All 5 of those games were losses, and he did not do very well. He's a great game manager, hand the ball off, scramble, throw a pass here and there to Watkins. But there is no way that, for a quarterback-driven league, that Tyrod Taylor is going to be top 5 on any list. That and Jameis Winston at number 7, that was a stretch. Yeah, he was great in college. He kind of surprised, had a solid first year, but yeah, I just think number 7, especially when you have the Bengals, like you said, way down at 20. How do you put
And he had
Tyrod
the
Taylor
Bengals
at
last year in
5?
like the top 10. So it's literally just
Yeah,
off-season clickbait.
yeah, and there's no way they fought. I mean, you look at AJ Green. We had a really good article on Cincy Jungle about future Hall of Famers, and I think it had AJ Green at something like 80%. You know, averaging 1,200 yards. 5 Pro Bowls in 5 years. Super elite wide receiver, and a quarterback. Who was in MVP conversations last year. I think he set the Bengals record for quarterback efficiency, or either finished first or second. He was second in the NFL after I think he was first when he got hurt. Finished number 2. Hill and Bernard, obviously a very good combo. This team was as dominant on offense last year. I don't know how you put them at 20 and you say, yeah, Tyrod Taylor and Jameis Winston are top 10. Yeah, it's just total nonsense. But like you guys said, it's something you're doing. And even if we were halfway through the season, I'm sure they'd still be saying it. It's just because the Bengals were an easy target.
Yep, and so congratulations to Frank Schwab of Yahoo Sports and Dave Damashek of NFL.com. You have made our haters of the week, and you now, round of applause. You joined Colin Cowherd, and the Bengals are never short on critics, so I get the feeling that this is going to be something that we will do often throughout the year. So those are our haters of the week this week. Our next segment, and one we plan on doing every week because we have such engaged readers, listeners, all that good stuff with Cincy Jungle. Again, you can contact us on Twitter, and please follow us at BengalsOBI. You can email us, theobinsider@gmail.com. And then obviously we do Facebook Live posts pretty frequently, and we're probably going to ramp those up throughout the week, and we get a lot of different comments and questions there. So you could reach out to us in a number of different platforms and submit your questions. We do have 2 others that I wanted to address this week, and I'm going to kick this one to both of you guys. It was in the Facebook Live post that I recently did this last week, and I'm going to start with you, Connor. Through the first part of training camp, do you have any sense of Zampese's play style? He says, I know it's still way early. I know they're working on the run, but does anything else stick out? Have you seen Gio flash anything? And that's from Chris Sarback.
I mean, yeah, like as I mentioned, I haven't really been super plugged in. And for what it's worth, even at Chargers training camp, I really haven't even been able to tell what that team is doing. Most teams don't really show what they're going to do in the season during training camp because they're paranoid about other teams finding that information out. But I think, like I kind of mentioned earlier, I really think that the Ryan Hewitt extension is maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe they overpaid for him, maybe they didn't. But at the end of the day, I think that is probably the most indicative thing of the entire offseason that I've seen in terms of the offense is that you have a guy who's going to potentially be a big asset in the running game. And we saw in 2014, like I said, what Cincinnati can do when its running game is really firing on all cylinders. Jeremy Hill was the most dominant running back in the entire NFL down the stretch, including Le'Veon Bell. He's better than Le'Veon Bell in 2014, almost the entire season when you put their stats next to each other, and that's not even considering the fact that Hill didn't start till halfway through the season. So, honestly, all I can say is AJ Green is still AJ Green. Andy Dalton's a great quarterback. I don't think that he's going to regress back to the guy he was before last year, and Jeremy Hill with Ryan Hewitt in front of him is a lot different of a player than he is out of shotgun. So hopefully we'll see some more of that this year.
Yeah. Any additional thoughts on that, Scott? I know Gio has been doing a number of different things, and I know Dalton seems to be pretty confident in keeping the momentum they built last year under Hugh Jackson rolling with Zampese. But any additional thoughts or observations on that front?
Yeah, there's 2 things I've heard about Zampese from the local media, which I have to take their word. They've obviously been at training camp a lot more frequently than I have. First one they've been saying is that he is a lot quieter than Hugh Jackson. I guess Hugh Jackson was very chirpy, very vocal, very upbeat, always encouraging, always, getting after players. And they said Zampese's total opposite. I think there was one reporter made a comment, he's been there a week and hasn't heard a word from him during camp. Just a very different demeanor. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays with the players who are used to, for the past couple of years, having a guy who's more, able to speak out, who's willing to say more things, trying to get either motivational or whatever. And even the Browns have said that much in training camp that he's just a very very vocal guy. And the other thing about play calling, I think will be very interesting. That, as Connor mentioned, the Hewitt signing might be an indication. We really won't know until the first preseason game. But the one thing that some people have been kind of rumoring is because he was a quarterback coach and because he's kind of groomed Dalton the idea of throwing more, going back to the Jay Gruden style of airing it out when Gruden was here the last year. So that'd be interesting to see if that's the route they go. I know when Hugh came, there was a lot of talk about how he wanted to run the ball more. They were going to use the 2 running backs and run heavy, and they've been one of the more consistent running teams. So it will be interesting to see when the preseason, especially the real season, when they play the Jets, if they do that, if they stay with that heavy running game or if they air it out like some people are kind of projecting with him.
Good stuff, and thanks to Chris for that question. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to take this next one here because it was sent to me via Twitter directly and to my personal Twitter account and not the OB Insider account. But it's from Mark Young, who's been an avid reader and follower of all the things we've done at Cincy Jungle. And he writes, I know you've always liked Josh Shaw. Why not move him to cornerback and pick up free agent safety Dante Whitner to help with depth for loss of William Jackson III? Well, first of all, we don't know how much Whitner has left in the tank, and obviously he's floating out there. He's probably going to be one of those late signings as injuries do occur this offseason. But I don't know. I don't know if he brings a ton of athleticism to the safety spot. I think now that Sean Williams got a little dinged up, and that might open the door there. But I think they really like the versatility of Shaw. And actually, if you've seen Shaw in training camp so far, he's actually been making some plays at the safety position. He picked off Andy Dalton in one of the practices as kind of a ranging safety at the back end of the defense there. So I think even though he played corner and safety at USC and did both pretty well, I think he's kind of, again, one of those hybrid guys that the Bengals defense have liked in recent years, and I think since he has such good athleticism, he's a bit bigger for a corner. He's pretty well built. He's a good tackler. I think he should be a swing guy. I don't think he should move directly to cornerback, especially because he didn't really get a ton of time last year directly at cornerback. He was in there a little bit as Dre got nicked up here and there, and Denard obviously was out towards the end of the year, so he got a little more time there. But I think he's more suited to the slot corner and safety, and I think you kind of develop him as a safety a bit more. You also see what you got in Sean Williams if he really does continue to grow off of the momentum he built last year and made some plays last year. So I don't think Whitner, especially right at this exact moment, I don't think he hit the panic button right now with Jackson and get Whitner on the line and try and strike a deal there. The one caveat I would say with that is that now that Leon Hall is off the market and not with the Bengals, that may predicate a little bit of a need there with Whitner and safety. So, that's something to kind of keep an eye on there. But for now, I think you kind of stay put. Maybe add a couple of guys out there, but maybe kind of keep Whitner at an arm's length for the time being and see how guys develop. Leave Shaw at safety. Let him kind of come into slot corner as well, and don't really pigeonhole him right now into one spot. That's my take. Thanks to Mark and Chris for this week's fan questions. Again, reach out to us via Twitter at BengalsOBI. Submit a question. Facebook Live, we read those comments and questions, and we'll have them answered on this weekly segment on the Orange and Black Insider. So thank you, guys. We're going to close up shop here, and it's going to be with a segment where we both get to embarrass ourselves and pat ourselves on the back simultaneously. And we're going to call this segment Where We Were Right and Where We Were Wrong. And since the in-season games haven't been played yet, we're going to base this right now on some of the spring and summer opinions, proclamations, and things like that we made about the Bengals this year. And now that training camp has started, we've kind of been able to see some of those things come to fruition. So, Scott, we're gonna start with where you were right on one of your opinions this offseason. You do a lot of opinion work on Cincy Jungle with your great bold prediction series and other items that you put up there. So, tell us somewhere where you think you're right so far.
I think one place I was right, and this is rewinding back a little bit further, would be on the bold predictions from last year. When I said that Giovanni Bernard would have a better year than Jeremy Hill. I know a lot of people thought that was kind of crazy, and I tried to lay out some reasons why. And one of the biggest reasons was even when Hill was having that great end of 2015, they weren't just exclusively featuring him. They consistently played both guys. So regardless if one was good or bad, and same with last year, when Hill was struggling, they both got a lot of touches, and it just worked out that, Hill just struggled for whatever reason. There's a lot of theories on why, if it's Bodine, if it's Hill, if it's all the above, if it's none of the above, if it's play calling, whatever it was. Something wasn't working right, and obviously, Bernard had a great year, averaged almost 5 yards a carry, was very active in the receiving game again, did everything but touchdowns because, once they got within a foot, they just handed it to Hill. So I'd say that was one area where I might have gotten one right.
Okay. Connor?
For me, I think I have to rewind to last year too, just because I haven't really made a lot of predictions this offseason. But for me, oh man, I had what's wrong on my mind. I'm just gonna go with what's wrong first, just because I have to think about what it is that I got right. I mean, I've gotten a couple of things right, but one thing, and it's pretty related, so I'm glad Scott brought it up. But I was one of the many to ride Hill into 2015 and to think that Jeremy Hill is going to be this breakout star. He was down the stretch in 2014, and I still think the jury's still out on him. I don't think that this last year necessarily means that he's not the player he once was in 2014. But for me, that means taking him in the first round of my fantasy draft and kind of sitting him on the bench a few weeks last year. And I love Jeremy Hill. I also love Gio, but it was definitely a bummer to see Jeremy Hill struggle last year.
All right, well, Connor, you're just never right then, I guess. Is that what you're telling us?
No. There's a lot of things I think I got.
So Connor's established himself as the star of what we were wrong about of this segment. So thanks, Connor. That's awesome.
Yeah, no
problem. Where I was right, I'm gonna say my stance this offseason on the tight end position. And my stance was, even though I know there's a lot of talent and the Bengals have invested, especially in the 2015 draft, they invested a lot in restocking the position, I was worried about a lot of things. And obviously the Tyler Eifert thing was one, and I kind of banged the drum before the draft this year that they might need to look at another tight end, even before the news came out with Eifert and all that kind of stuff. That was, and obviously now he's rehabbing an ankle surgery that he had to undergo because of an injury at the Pro Bowl. You got Croft who got injured, and now Uzomah's up there as the primary tight end, and he was known as, even though he's got great athleticism, in 2015 when he was coming out of the draft, he was known as the raw athletic prospect that needed a lot of coaching up, and now year two, he's stepping up into a really big role. The other thing that kind of worries me a little bit is there's not even with the health of Eifert and Croft, there's not a great blocker in there. You've got a lot of great pass catchers. Croft is probably the best blocker of all of them. I wouldn't say he's outstanding at it, but that is something within a tight end group that you want to do, especially with the Bengals looking to reestablish the run and get Jeremy Hill back on track. So that's one area I can kind of pat myself on the back. Where I was wrong, you could go back to the first episode last week where I was just gushing about William Jackson III and how I think he could become the best cornerback on the roster, and I have high hopes for him this year, even though the role, and obviously he gets hurt. So a little bit out. Well, it's a little bit out of my control, but I was gushing on him, and then I must have jinxed him because a week later.
Yeah, maybe we should cancel the podcast now.
So that's where I was wrong, Scott.
I'd say mine. There was a set of quizzes that we were posting on Cincy during the dead period, kind of between the draft and training camp, just to keep us engaged, have something to do. And one of the quizzes that we posted was naming the Bengals receiving yardage leaders per season. So obviously, the last few years has been AJ Green, and before that, Chad Johnson. And so basically, I made these quizzes and then I posted them. So you would figure someone who actually made the quiz had to had to look up the answers, had to fill them in, had to verify it, test it. I've seen the answers, all day long. You know what they are, post it. Like, okay, I'm going to take the quiz now. I could not believe how many I missed. And it was all these, all the old guys. I was pretty good up from Pickens on to the present. But pre-Pickens, just because of my age, I just had to guess. I think I guessed Collinsworth and Eddie Brown, and then if that wasn't one of them, I just had no idea. And I know I have an age excuse because I'm not 60 or 70, but at the same time, since I had just put this together and I had seen these names all day long, you'd think I would have remembered it, but yeah, I just totally whiffed when it came to taking the quiz that I actually made and had seen the answers for.
Well, those are really, that's a really entertaining series, by the way, and I think that's really cool how that lays out, and you can take the test and everything. That was a really cool idea by you, Scott. Connor, I'm going to give you one last chance of redemption, buddy. Did you find anything that you were right about?
Yeah. Okay. I think it was pretty but last year, I've only made one bold predictions article, I think, in my entire life in terms of like on a week-to-week basis. But just I had this feeling last year. I was tracking Carlos Dunlap's sack totals all year long, and I knew that right before the Denver game he was, I think, 2 sacks away from breaking. So he needed 3 sacks, and if he hit 3 sacks, he would have broken the Bengals' all-time official sacks record over Eddie Edwards, who had way more than what he has listed on his career. But those were obviously the pre-sack era. So I saw Khalil Mack dominate Michael Schofield, Michael Schofield, main character, Prison Break, also the Broncos' right tackle. I saw that Khalil Mack dominated him, got 5 sacks in a couple weeks before, and I just, I put it out there. You know what? Carlos Dunlap this week is going to get 3 sacks, and what do you know? Got 3 sacks, became the Bengals' all-time franchise record holder for sacks, and then obviously he went on to, I think that was the last game of the season he had a sack, so he broke he had the 13.5 sacks, which I think was the Bengals record. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it's a pretty cool
so you
moment
need to
for me.
protect 3 sacks every week.
I mean, yeah, right?
Yeah, there you go.
And also, I mean, I've been to 2 Padres games this year, 2-0 in those games, so maybe I should fly to Cincinnati.
There you go. So that's where we were right and where we were wrong this week, and we're going to continue to probably have a few more laughs at our expense as we continue to do that segment during the season. So that's going to close us up this week. There's a lot to get to, obviously with the news and fan questions and all of that good stuff. Keep them coming. Appreciate all of you tuning in, downloading, and listening. I hope you're enjoying the show, and obviously we're going to keep doing this throughout training camp, throughout the season, and keep having some fun with it. So, again, follow us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can email us, the obinsider@gmail.com, and you can also hit us up on Facebook, our Facebook page, obviously the website as well. Keep your eyes glued to Cincy Jungle. We're putting up tons of content, and a lot of multimedia stuff, videos and tweets and all kinds of good stuff. So keep it glued to Cincy Jungle. And for episode 2 of the Orange and Black Insider, I'm Anthony Cosenza. For Connor Howe, Scott Schultz, thanks for listening, and Hoo Day.